Podcast burnout is a special kind of burnout. As someone that's produced and published anywhere from 1 to 6 episodes a week for the past 5 years, there has been more than a few times that I wanted to change my name, move to a remote island, and never hear the word podcast ever again. Podcasting is exhausting. Whether you are doing it on your own or you have a team, it's time-consuming, it's draining, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's worth the effort. In this episode, we're going to talk about how podcast burnout costs you money, what to do when you want to quit everything, and how to manage the feelings of overwhelm when you feel like you're caught in the revolving door of podcasting. Hello and welcome to Podcast for Profit. My name is Morgan Franklin. I'm a podcast producer, strategist, and educator. This podcast will help you create and grow a podcast that cuts through the noise of social media and speaks directly to your target audience. If you're ready to create a podcast that will align you with the experts in your industry, position yourself as a trusted leader, and create another source of revenue for your business, you're in the right place. One of the most daunting parts of podcasting is that it never ends. Literally, it is never ending, or it can feel never ending. There's always an episode to write or a guest to research, or I need to schedule a recording time or edit the end of this episode or figure out what song to go on this ad or follow up with this guest that didn't respond. And all of that week after week after week is intimidating. It's stressful. And when you finally feel like you're caught up, it's only about 4 days before you're right back where you started. Stress and burnout are completely debilitating for your creativity and your motivation to create content. The times that I have felt the most burnt out from podcasting and creating, I didn't want to get out of bed, much less record a podcast. And you know what? For most of us, we work through the pain, right? No matter how depressed we feel or tired we are, we know a podcast has to come out. We have to record 2 interviews tomorrow, and we've got to suck it up and move past that feeling. So let's start right there. Let's start when you're tired, you're burnt out, and this is the last thing you want to do, but you know you have to do it. That's not a good feeling. It's not a good place to work from, and it's impossible to do your best work from a place of exhaustion and overwhelm. Whenever I'm feeling this way, I make a list of everything that absolutely has to be done for the rest of the week. I'm just talking about the rest of the week. And this isn't getting ahead. It's not asking yourself what you could get done. It's what do I absolutely have to get done by the end of this week. Break those down into tasks with manageable sections. Usually I'll do a main task and break it down to even the tiniest thing. For example, I'll say if I'm finishing editing an episode, edit episode, proof episode, export episode, upload episode, name episode, write episode description, and schedule episode. That's how much I break it down. And that's what I want you to do. No matter what day of the week it is, it could be Monday, and you're just falling apart, make a clear list. An exact list of everything that you need to finish before next Monday for your podcast and start going down that list as effectively and efficiently as possible. And as quickly as you can, get your podcast work done. And when you finish the list, put it away. Put your podcast away. Do not think about your podcast. That's why I want you to make a list of everything that you absolutely have to get done this week. Get it done and do not think about this podcast until next week. We all need a break. We all need time to let our brain have a moment of peace. And if you are constantly thinking and worrying and panicking, you can't give your brain the space it needs to provide the inspiration and motivation you need to make anything work. The title of this episode is Podcast Burnout is Costing You Money. Because it is. You're getting too burnt out on creating this podcast that you can't make it over the threshold to actually effectively market or find a big enough audience to monetize the podcast. If you can't build a community around your podcast, you can't bring money into your podcast. In every aspect of life, we underestimate how much people can feel what we're thinking or what we're going through or what we're actually feeling. And when you're thinking, this podcast is such a waste of time, I'm never going to be a successful podcaster. No one even listens to my show. Whether you're saying this out loud to people or not, your listener can sense it and it manifests itself into your life. The other day, I was on Threads and I said, it's crazy how the more you talk about your podcast, the more people listen to your podcast. And I was genuinely surprised by the dozens of people in the comments saying, well, it's so cringe to talk about my podcast. And trust me, I get it. Self-promotion is awkward and it can feel kind of like a used car salesman. But I really want you to think about this. If you aren't promoting your podcast, who will? If you aren't excited about your own podcast, who cares? If you're feeling burnt out and tired and like you want to give up, how much do you think that is coming through in your podcast? We all have bad days. This is not a message of toxic positivity that you have to be happy and that you have to be having the best day of your life every single day or every time you record, because that is not realistic. And things are going to happen. But when you're starting to feel like you're in that slump where it's not just my cat died and now I have to record this podcast episode, but more like a constant dread of having to deal with your podcast, that's when you have to make a change. I've worked in some variation of service or consulting for my entire career. I grew up in a hair salon, and I've been around professionals that are customer-facing since I can remember. One thing I've always been very aware of and thought about at length when I went to college was, what kind of career can I have that isn't going to make me absolutely miserable in 5 or 10 years? And I know this is slightly different than podcasting, but is it? Your podcast is a really big commitment. And I think so many times, like that little innocent 18-year-old going into college, picking a major and just diving straight into the deep end, we're not really thinking about the future when we start a podcast. And when times start to get tough, or it's not that shiny new thing anymore, it gets really hard to keep going. So what can we do? You know, we've talked about a lot of problems and a lot of feelings, but what can you actually do to avoid burnout and get out of the stress spiral if you're going into it? The first thing is, and this is what you need to conquer any long-term goal, you have to know why you're doing it. Why do you have this podcast? What is the deeper meaning behind this show? And when you look at what you want to accomplish, what does that really look like? If it's money related or part of it is money related, do you know how you're going to start making inroads to getting those partners or networking with the right people? Or even do you know how much you want to make? You can't hit a moving target or a target that doesn't exist. And trying to rationalize why you're investing all this time and energy and money into this podcast when you're already feeling stressed and overwhelmed is really hard. Is basically impossible, because there will come a time for every podcaster that does not have a clear why, and even some of the podcasters that do have a clear why, when you will think, why am I doing this? What's the point? And it can be really hard to overcome that feeling. The next is having a dedicated schedule and true accountability to this podcast. About 3 weeks ago, I was moving into a new house. I'm still renovating the house. Nothing was packed. Nothing was finished. Nothing was ready. And I was very stressed out. The day I moved was a Sunday. I still hadn't finished my outline for my episode Monday, the next day. I didn't know where my microphone was, and I had nowhere to record. The air conditioning wasn't working. I had to record the episode under a comforter, sweating from places I didn't even know I could sweat from at 10 p.m. on the night before that episode came out. This is what I mean about dedication and accountability. Have you made an agreement with yourself that no matter what, this podcast is coming out? Because there's such a different energy around I'm doing this and I might do this, or I'll do it when I get around to it. And that can be so much more stressful and consuming than just having the accountability and dedication of knowing this is going to get done one way or the other. Sponsors don't want to work with podcasts that post episodes inconsistently. No one wants to partner with a podcast when they can't rely on it to come out on time. Listeners don't want to invest in a show they can't trust is going to be published. I know we talked about this earlier in the episode, but make a schedule, make a plan, and know what you're doing. I might not be able to outline my episodes until the day I record them, and that might be the day before it comes out, but I know what episode is coming out in 5 weeks from now and what I need to do and when I'm going to do it, and there is a lot of comfort in that. Lastly, when you get to the place where you can hire someone, do it. Hire an editor, hire an audio engineer, hire someone to do your social media or schedule your guest interviews or research your guests for you. Whatever is causing you the most stress and is the hardest for you to do, outsource that first. We all need to take a break sometimes, and you should plan on taking a break from your podcast. This has to be something that you do. And whether you take that break from getting ahead, which is what I choose to do just because I don't want to miss a week of publishing, or you decide to do seasons, know when you're taking a break. If you do have seasons, and I'm only bringing this up because I see it happen so often, let people know when you're going away and then when you'll be coming back. Don't leave people wondering where you are or if you'll ever be back. Make it very clear. This is the end of season 4. We'll be back in a month. Maybe run some reruns or best of compilation episodes, but don't make your audience or future advertisers wonder if you'll ever be back. Usually anytime in June, July, August, or December is the best time of the year to take a break between seasons. This is when most people are off their schedule. They're celebrating holidays, or they're on summer break, or generally not listening to podcasts like they normally do. And you should use this to your advantage. If you already know you want to take some time off, do it during those months when people are also inconsistently listening to podcasts. You deserve to have a podcast you love and that you're excited to work on. Like I've said so many times in this episode, podcasting is not easy. And if you're making it even harder on yourself by treating it like a chore, making money from it will be that much harder. This week, I want you to work on creating a mission statement for your podcast that walks through exactly why and who you've created this podcast for, what you want to accomplish with your show, and what successful monetization would look like for you. So, what do you want to make from every episode? Do not skip over the details. Be as specific and detailed as possible. I want you to know who your listener is. Why are they listening? What will make them come back? At the end of the day, what do you hope they are taking from every episode? How do you want the podcast to impact their life and your life? And last but not least, how much money do you want to make from this podcast? Break it down by episode. How much money do you want to make for every episode? Answer that question. You can do this. Podcasting is hard work, but you can do hard work. This is nothing new, and it's nothing you aren't completely capable of doing. Know your why, and the rest is on its way. And as always, I can't wait to listen to your podcast. Hey, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and you'd like to hear more episodes like this one, go ahead and subscribe to the show. New episodes air every Monday morning. And if you found this episode valuable and you want to help other business owners and podcasters, will you leave me a 5-star review? It helps the show rank higher in the charts and brings more entrepreneurs the information they need to start making money on their podcast.